WTO hasn't been getting much attention here, but certainly in Australia it continues to be front and centre of everyone's thinking, certainly in the minds of policymakers. Australia is a smaller economy. We're the 14th largest economy in the world. We're not of the size and scale of US, China, or some of our other trading partners. For us, the WTO is absolutely fundamental. It provides the rules of the road for our participation in the global trading system. It enables us to play on a level playing field with the big economies, such as the US and China, but also it provides the fundamental underpinning of all of the negotiations and agreements that have come since, and that includes some of the regional initiatives that you've referred to. They are based very much on fundamental WTO norms. And it is for that reason that we continue to value the system and to work quite actively in Geneva to drive reform. We note that G20 leaders last year did recognise the need for reform in the WTO, and we support that. We have been co-sponsors of initiatives such as the transparency and notification proposal to really improve fundamental WTO processes. We're also active in discussions on the appellate body, and it's no secret that we are concerned about the current impasse, and we would like to see that resolved. We do recognise that there are concerns both with the operation of the WTO and the dispute settlement system, and that is why we, Australia, as a friend of the system, I think we're called in the WTO, has really been there driving some initiatives for reform and proposals. But on top of that, also with Singapore and Japan, we are continuing to drive plurilateral initiatives, which we see as being supportive of the multilateral system. So one example is the recent launch of the e-commerce initiative, which we see as a way of demonstrating the WTO fitness for 21st century conditions and a formulation of rules. And so we're pleased that that will go forward this year. We've got 76 members who've joined up so far, covering 90% of trade. We do encourage participation by as many WTO members as possible. It's very nascent. It's too early to say what the outcome will be, but we do see that as a positive way of driving momentum in Geneva.
So we're running a little bit short on time, and we want to make sure that we allow enough time for questions, but maybe if our other panelists have any kind of quick comments on the WTO they'd like to just wrap up with, and then we'll move to the Q&A part of the program. Yeah. Elizabeth covered it for everyone? Perfect. Good answer. Well, Ken.
So thanks, Doug. Thanks to all of you. Remind everyone of our WITA questioning ground rules. Please identify yourself, your affiliation, and to ask your question in the form of a question, please.
Thanks. Jean-François Wattin with AFEP, which is French Business Roundtable. I have two questions to the panel, and thanks them for a great presentation. But first question is, can you make the difference between the long-term decisions by companies to invest in cheaper ASEAN countries, because China workforce is now much more expensive than it was, and the decision to now diversify out of China because of the US-China trade relation? And the second question is more geared toward Elizabeth, and how much does Australia fear to be one of the first collateral victims of an agreement where the sales of, say, LNG and various agricultural products would be a big share of the negotiations?
Okay, thank you. Well, I noted in your comments you mentioned the point about non-discriminatory. So maybe we'll let you take the second question, Elizabeth, and we'll go for some of the other folks.
Yes, thanks very much, Jean-Francois. One point that I didn't make is that Australia has a free trade agreement both with China and with the US. And those free trade agreements, which are based on, or underpinned by WTO norms and rules, do enable us to ensure some regularity of trade relations with our trading partners. Now, Australia's got a long and well-established presence in China. As I mentioned, we're a significant exporter of commodities. Well, we're well known. We also enjoy, at the moment, significant tariff differentials, but even if those were to disappear with the disappearance of retaliatory tariffs, due to our FTA, we still enjoy some preferential tariff arrangements on some key commodities. LNG, the demand in China and indeed in Southeast Asia and North Asia is ever increasing. And so we see, even if the US does agree to supply LNG, the demand is there, the pie is increasing, supply from Australia is assured under long-term contracts, and China continues to be one of our biggest customers for LNG, or sources of LNG. So we aren't as concerned by those particular commodity type arrangements. We also, our biggest export is iron ore, and I don't think the US exports iron ore. But I think the other point, though, that Doug mentioned is the broader one of our desire to see a non-discriminatory WTO consistent outcome. And there I think our value that we place on the WTO system is important, and we would hope that any outcome does adhere to WTO rules.
Okay. The first part of the question was about sort of the long-term, looking at potentially sourcing cheaper labor versus kind of perhaps the more immediate pressing question about diversification vis-a-vis China. Andrew, you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I suppose if talks do break down and the tariffs become permanent, I think then there would be an impetus for firms to relocate production bases outside of China. But I think it really is sort of an extension of a natural process that is already beginning because of rising labor costs in China vis-a-vis the other regional economies. But I think, again, it's still too early to tell. Which countries gain ultimately will really depend on their comparative advantages in producing those products, and also who has a more favorable investment climate.
Yeah, I think in regard to the first question, I echo Andrea's point that it's not completely separate. I think the trend was happening already. If I look at some of the Korean companies, they were already beginning to look for other countries as an alternative manufacturing basis. But all this trade tension is sort of facilitating or accelerating the trend. So I see it's a kind of interlinked.
Sherm Katz, the Trade Lawyers think tank person as well. Thanks very much to you for these good presentations. The question is about China's subsidies. Think of Made in China 2025, $350 billion of subsidies to key industries of the future. The question is, to what extent your governments share the concerns of not only the US, but also Europe and Japan about these subsidies? As you probably know, that trilateral group is meeting to develop disciplines or restrictions or limitations. Thank you.
We'd like to take a stab at the impact of subsidies in China on key strategic industries. Who's the last one holding the mic?
I think anything that distorts the level playing field, whether it's through industrial policy or otherwise, is going to be extremely concerning. Small countries don't have the same abilities, and I think the sheer scale and impetus is definitely something that we are all concerned about. Now, how we go about addressing that, I think we've certainly tried to do that through the CPTPP in state-owned enterprises and greater transparency, anti-corruption. But it is a process. I think we are all committed in working together to find solutions for this.
Yes, we're following the trilateral negotiations as closely as possible, speaking to the participants, and we're looking forward to seeing the outcome of that process. I go back to the WTO as the fundamental forum for addressing subsidies, those issues that are inherently multilateral in nature. Yes, CPTPP has gone a long way, but subsidies, domestic support, really the WTO is the forum, and so it's important. So we hope whatever comes out of the trilateral process can be translated through to the WTO.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Oh, the boss says two. So.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Sherry Stevenson from the PECC, Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. Two quick questions on RCEP. The first one is, given that ASEAN has now moved from a positive to a negative list on services, which is highly commendable, is there any hope that that might be also taken over into RCEP? And if not, will the services commitments that are going to be negotiated and happen under RCEP, will they be multilateralized, or will there be separate schedules for every member? That's the first one. The second one is, is there any hope, or to what extent might the disciplines that have been pioneered in the CPTPP on digital trade and e-commerce have any chance of being incorporated into RCEP?
Okay, I think maybe first one was a little bit deep, but detailed. So maybe someone could take at least initially take thoughts on disciplines from CPTPP that might make sense in the RCEP context. And want to add some thoughts on it.
Apologies, everyone, for the sounds in the hall.
Yes. Well, actually, on the negative list question, my understanding is that China and the ASEANs are scheduling services commitments on a negative list basis in RCEP, which would represent a significant leap forward. But Andrea? That's my understanding, and that's what I've been advised. So if that is in fact the case, then that would represent the first time that these countries have done so. So that is quite significant. CPTPP disciplines in RCEP. Digital trade is probably the key one, absolutely. We did note that some of the standards will be different, but digital trade is absolutely one actually that we've already got in our SAFTA as well. So Doug, Australia-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, first one to have a digital trade strategy, based on TPP.
There you go. I guess we have time for one more question.
Dan Pearson, Pearson International Trade Services. I note that the American Farm Bureau Federation, in its meeting a few weeks ago, the delegates voted to encourage the administration to rejoin the TPP process. I don't expect that to happen right away, but if in the foreseeable future a U.S. administration does want to do that, how complicated would it be from your perspectives? And I ask that in the context that the USMCA has some provisions that may or may not be compatible exactly with what's in the TPP. So just talk to me about the feasibility of the U.S. affiliating with CPTPP.
Well, that's an excellent question.
And an easy one to answer.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, if they want to come back, you would of course welcome them.
That's right.
I think it really depends. If the US is going to plug and play and take on the standards, I mean, I think that would be fairly easy. But I think it's important to remember that the CPTPP had suspended 22 provisions from the original TPP. These were seen as key things that were important to the US and were meant to incentivize the US to return to the TPP in its original form. I think it really depends on the state of politics and the state of the economy at that time. I think realistically speaking, we would expect some form of renegotiation, and how long that will take, whether that will pass, I think that remains to be seen.
Well, that's a great question. In fact, well, I think they have could have positive and negative impact. One positive impact, I think, will be more attractive for more countries to access to the CPTPP. Probably South Korea will access straight away. It will be more beneficial for access market. But I think it's very difficult, not only from the political perspective, but also to rebalance the power on the different members of CPTPP. But as Chila said, we encourage the accession of US to the CPTPP, and I think would be very important from a geopolitical matter to be part of that agreement.
Just to add, we were also very encouraged by the reference to Indo-Pacific negotiations in the recently passed ARIA Act, and we thought that was a good indication of the sense of Congress that there is still a groundswell of support for the US joining TPP. As Matthias and Andrea said, we would welcome the US rejoining. The rules-based order that governs regional trade in the region would only benefit. And so we certainly look forward to sometime in the future the US wanting to join, but yes, I think the challenges that Matthias and Andrea or the processors have set out would apply. But it would be to the benefit of US farmers, clearly.
So I think our panelists lived up to their billing. A lot of insight that they shared with us today, and I want to definitely thank them, and we can give them all a good round of applause.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Doug. Terrific conversation. I think the last question was a great transition. We're going to have just a short break here. Don't go too far, folks, to our next panel. And of course, some people who are very well versed in CPTPP, including one of the lead architects of that agreement, will be joining us on our second panel. Thanks to all of you for joining us today.